The importance of diversity in biology can't be underestimated. After all, it is a diversity in populations that enables them to survive a changing environment. And when your populations are diverse, your community is also diverse. The diversity of a community is an indicator of ecological health. Let's get ready to explore why diversity in ecosystems is so important and how the diversity of communities helps to maintain ecosystem health. After this lesson, you'll be able to refine scientific models and questions about the effect of complex biotic and abiotic interactions on all biological systems, from cells and organisms to populations, communities, and ecosystems. You'll be able to design a plan for collecting data to show that all biological systems are affected by complex and biotic and abiotic interactions. You'll be able to analyze data to identify possible patterns and relationships between a biotic or abiotic factor and a biological system. You'll be able to use representations or models to analyze quantitatively and qualitatively the effects of disruptions to dynamic homeostasis in biological systems. You'll be able to justify the selection of the kind of data needed to answer scientific questions about the interaction of populations within communities. You'll be able to predict the effects of a change in the community's populations on the community. And finally, you'll be able to make scientific claims and predictions about how species diversity within an ecosystem influences ecosystem stability. Ecological communities are complex systems, and as you've probably gathered by now, the individual components are intertwined with one another to help maintain what is often a delicate homeostatic balance. Any imbalance in part of the community affects all members to some degree, and some members of the community feel the effects of the imbalance more dramatically than others. So in this lesson, we'll look at different components of ecological communities and how they influence and affect one another. How diverse an ecological community is relies on its species richness and abundance. Species richness is the way we describe how many different species inhabit a particular area, whether it's a specific habitat or as broad as an entire biome. Species richness varies from region to region all over the world. An important factor that determines species richness is latitude, how far north or how far south a geographic region is located. Richness tends to increase as latitudes approach the equator. This is because the regions of the world nearer the equator have warmer temperatures, large amounts of precipitation, and consistent climate year-round. And the poles of the Earth will have the lowest species richness due to cold temperatures, reduced precipitation events, and limited light availability. Relative species abundance refers to the numbers of individuals in a species relative to all the other individuals of the other species within a specific habitat or biome. And both richness and abundance are critical to the maintenance of homeostasis in ecosystems. So what you're seeing here is a diagram that illustrates species richness of vertebrates in different places in the world. The more species richness that exists is found in the regions where the red coloration is, and then that richness decreases as we go from red to yellow to green to blue, and gray obviously is going to have the least amount of species richness. There are specific categories of species in an ecosystem that act as environmental health indicators. A keystone species is the best example. Keystone species are those species whose presence is vital to maintaining biodiversity in an ecosystem. Okay, so notice that all the other components of the ecosystem rely on the keystone species. Keystone species are those species whose presence is vital to maintaining biodiversity in an ecosystem. Without them, the entire ecological community collapses and the ecosystem falls out of balance. Which means that the homeostasis of that ecosystem then becomes disrupted. So let's examine a famous example of a keystone species. One of the most famous examples of a keystone species is the sea otter, which lives along the coast of the North Pacific Ocean. The sea otter, species Enhydrolutris, is critically important to the balance of this particular ecosystem, as it is a keystone species, a keystone predator for the ecosystem it shares with the other marine life, namely sea urchins and kelp forests. Sea otters prey on sea urchins, and the sea urchins consume the kelp, and specifically they consume the holdfasts of the kelp. These kelp forests serve as shelter for multiple fish and shellfish species. So without the kelp forests, the primary productivity, which is the amount of carbon fixed by photosynthesis, declines. Food and shelter sources for multiple other species decreases, and this causes a ripple effect on the rest of the ecosystem. So the fact that the sea otter preys on the urchins is critical to the health of this particular marine ecosystem. And just so you know, the arrows that are pointing from the kelp to the urchin, from the urchin to the sea otter, indicate the flow of the energy. So please understand that the kelp is not eating the sea urchin, but the sea urchin is eating the kelp, and that the otter is eating the sea urchin. So let's talk about another way that ecosystems can be disrupted, and that the homeostasis of those ecosystems can be thrown out of balance.